The dead in Christ are going to rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. I'm saying 18 because I accidentally forget it as we get caught up in other things. We're going to be getting caught up in a lot of studying tonight. So, we'll start with the biggest thing, of course, is this word caught up. Now, caught up, Greek word harpazo. It literally means to seize or snatch away, and it's where we get our English word harpoon. Harpazo, harpoon. Boom. I watched a kid fishing with a harpoon while I was swimming in Hawaii last week. I just wanted to stick that in there for you guys who are over here freezing. But I actually have never seen someone actually harpoon fishing. I don't think I've played with it myself, but there was a young kid who caught a fish and put it in a little bag, and he was out there with his harpoon, a little rubber band launching one. And so that's where we get harpazo. The Latin Vulgate, the Latin Bible is the Bible used by the church for many, many years. And in there, it uses the word rapimer, which is translated, we are caught up. So it's the conjugation of we all get caught up. And it's the base verb is rapio, and it's where we get rapid from. It's also where this word, the sword, the rapier, which is like the Three Musketeers style sword, right? A very quick moving sword. So this idea is a quick action. I want to give you a few verses in the Bible that use this word in other contexts, just for ideas. Matthew 11:12, from the days of John the Baptist till now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. That's the word harpazo, to take it by force. John 10:12, but a hireling who's not a shepherd, the good shepherd, right? One who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. It's when the wolf catches a sheep. That's the word harpazo. Acts 8:39, now after Philip baptizes the Ethiopian eunuch, they came up out of the water and the Spirit of the Lord caught Philip away, harpazo. So the eunuch saw him no more and he went on his way rejoicing. Philip pops up in another city, right? So here's harpazo. He comes out of the water and boom, Philip's gone and he's now in a different city. 2 Corinthians 12:2, I know a man. This is Paul talking about his experience of going to the third heaven, going to heaven. Whether in the body or I do not know, or whether out of the body I do know, but such a one was caught up to the third heaven. There's that word again. When Paul was zipped away into heaven, that's a great relation tie right there. And Revelation 12:5, she bore a child who is to rule all the nations with an iron rod. Revelation 12 is a vision, and this is symbolic of Israel and Jesus being born, the child, and her child, Jesus, was caught up to God and his throne, the ascension of Jesus Christ. So when Jesus ascends into heaven, it uses this word harpazo. When a wolf snatches away a sheep, it's harpazo. When Philip disappears to another city, it's harpazo. All right? And when Paul gets zipped into heaven, it's harpazo. But again, it's our Greek word rapio, and it's where we come up with the English word rapture. So when people say rapture's not in the Bible, well, no, the English word's not in the Bible. But it comes from a Latin word, and that's where we get our English word. Just like the word Trinity is not in the Bible, and there's a whole lot of key words that aren't in the Bible, but the Bible clearly teaches them. Now, I'm going to teach this verse before backing out to the full spectrum. It says we shall be caught up, harpazoed, snatched away. It's a quick. It can be, but is not necessarily violent. I don't think God was violent with Philip. I don't think God was violent with Paul when he snatched him, but it's definitely a quick snatching away. Paul says, we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together. Paul believed that he would be raptured because if he thought it wasn't him, he could have said you or they, but he said we. Paul believed that he would be part of the rapture. Caught up with them in the clouds. Where are they going? They're going to the clouds. What are they going to do there? Meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord. Once you go to be with him, you're remaining with him forevermore, never again to depart. One common teaching that I just want to at least get my 2 bits in. Some would say that this word meet, there's our word. Oh, I didn't even make it things. Here's a lot of things. Meet, apenteses. It's only 4 times in the Bible, in the New Testament. And some would say, maybe I'll just put this, I'm going to hide that for a second so you don't get distracted. It's often taught. In fact, the first person I ever heard personally teach it was R.C. Sproul. Great Bible teacher, loves the Lord. I've got some differences of opinion with the guy, but the guy's a great teacher. But he said, well, this word meet was the word used like when the people would go out to meet the king after battle and they would come back with the king. You'd go out to meet him and you'd all come back together. And what this is trying to propose is the idea of a post-tribulational rapture, that at the second coming of Jesus, we're going to be raptured to meet with Jesus in the air and then descend with Jesus as he rides back in. We'll talk more about this later, some of the problems with that view. But as far as the actual word, because they say, well, that's what the word means. That's not necessarily what the word means. It does mean to go out and meet people, and it does have more of an official vibe to it. But it's 4 times in the Bible, and the 2 times we find it is in Matthew 25 in the parable of the wise and foolish virgins. The wise virgins go out to meet the groom, and they go with the groom to the wedding feast. They don't meet the groom and bring the groom back to where they were. They meet the groom and go with them to the wedding feast. So here's half the uses in the Bible. It means to go out and meet and go away with. The other time is in Acts 28:15. That's what the book of Acts is just wrapping up quickly, and Paul gets to Rome, or he gets to Italy, and it just says some guys come out to meet him, and that's it. They part ways. It doesn't seem like either went with each other. They met and then went their own way. So I don't believe this verb, you can make the argument, it specifically means to meet and go one direction. It just means to meet. So I don't think we can make a bigger case out of that. Now, we're going to start diving deeper. Here's the thing is, we're going to talk about understanding the rapture and the end times events. This is eschatology. That's our fancy word. When you want to study end times, it has to do a lot with how you interpret the whole Bible. And so hermeneutics is our word, and I have a much longer study when we did that 5-part series. But in short, how I interpret the Bible is going to determine how I interpret everything. And when I read the Bible personally, I first off take it literally. What it says is what it means. The most common and easily understood thing is what it means. When I have Jubilee read the Bible, whatever she takes away is probably the right belief. Now, some stuff you have to do a little more work on. I get that. But typically, you read it, and it just makes sense the way it reads. Now, I say it's the literal, but it's the grammatical, historical, cultural hermeneutic. I read it literally, but I also realize that it was written a long time ago. And so just like if I use slang from the last 100 years, because we all use slang that's probably been around for 50 years, 20 years, we all get it, but someone from back then sure wouldn't get it. Just like when they use phrases, it might not make sense to us, so some studying might need to be done. Cultural, understanding how people did talk a little differently back then. Things like that helps me interpret. But I believe God doesn't give us information for no reason. When he says it, there's a purpose behind it. And so here's a quote. I was kind of saddened to see. Barclay, I read his commentaries on many things, but when it came to this text, he says, we are not meant to take with crude and insensitive literalism what is the seer's vision. It is not the details which are important. That's William Barclay. I'm thinking, no, I think the details are important. I think I read this and I'm paying attention to the details because I want to know what's going on in here. And so when it comes to understanding end times and specifically the rapture, usually the people who have a hard time believing the rapture is because they don't understand it. And one of the things they tease, and I totally receive the jokes. I think they're hilarious in all honesty. They're like, you pre-trib guys, like you got your charts and your maps and your timelines and I go, I know, because those things help me understand things better. And if I just acted like all this is just symbolic of something, well, I don't need a chart or a timeline because this is all just symbolic. Who gets to make up what it symbolizes? David? Arla? I mean, like, if it's all symbolic, who gets to determine? But if it's straight up when it says, like, Joshua walked around Jericho for 6 days, I think Joshua walked around Jericho for 6 days. And on the next day, you know what I mean? Like, I just take it as it says it. So I made a timeline because that's what dispensationalists do. That's a joke. But here's what I wanted to do for fun. This is just for fun for a moment. We've got the Joe's Life timeline. Ta-da! We're going to learn about me tonight. Because that's what you guys really came. You're like, we hope that instead of talking about the Bible and the rapture, Joe would just talk about himself. But this is going to serve as a little lesson. Joe was born in 1985, okay? Now, you guys might be able to guess how old I am, but not necessarily, right? Because you don't know what month I was born. So you can know that, okay, he's either 38 or 39, right? And that would be over here. You know, I'm 38 or I'm 39. Makes sense? Because, I mean, if I was born in January, but I didn't tell you that. And the idea with this is like, many of you know me, but if you didn't know anything about me, we're now going to start digging a little deep. Joe got married. Okay? Put that in there. I got married at some point, right? And I forgot to make a thing for it, but I wanted to just say, like, Joe graduated. And we'll just pretend I'm probably 18-ish at that time, because that's typically the age people are when they graduate high school, right? Graduate high school. Joe had his first kid. You know nothing about me, but that's the most logical place to put it, right? You get married, you have kids. That's what people do. Joe has 6 kids: Haley, Judah, Jubilee, Benny, Hannah, and Ellie. Doesn't go on the timeline right now, but it's information, right? Now you know a little bit more about my kids. Joe was 24 when he got married. Well, that's helpful. So 38, 18. We'll put that right there. Those go together now, okay? There we go. Joe became a pastor. Huh? Maybe I became a pastor after I got married and had a kid. Like, it's best we can do. Joe's daughter, Haley, was his flower girl. Wah, wah. It's okay. Obviously, I had my first kid before I was married because I've got that information. Now, did I not print one? Or one one may have been dropped on the way. I'll get that one later. Benny was the first child born while Joe was pastoring a revival church. So what we could do now is, here's pastor, and if these are in order, which I didn't say, but it's like, okay, I can put Judah and Jubilee here, and then Benny and Hannah and Ellie would have to come after that. And the thing, I don't know if I dropped it or said it somewhere, but I had, it's right there. Haley was 6 at Joe's wedding. I was 24 when I got married. I graduated at 18. That means my first kid has got to go somewhere really close to there. Was she born before or after I graduated? Well, you don't know. You might know. But from this information, you don't. But what we've just done, we took bits of information and we logically just started playing out where they go. This is a great example. If that's all you knew, you would know that it was around a time, but you couldn't necessarily say before or after. Other things were placed in logical order, but had to be moved once we got more information. And this whole exercise was simply to show, I'm going to give you guys a bunch of different Bible verses, and we're going to see, now when we have all this information, if I'm going to start plotting these things out, how do we end up with an end times timeline? And all these different events, and knowing where they go. Now, this is a timeline I borrowed. I showed it while we were in Ezekiel. And there are verses down at the bottom that the person who made this, not me, but I agree with all of it, I think, is there's the reference down there. So many of those references will be popping up tonight. But this is how you put it all together. I had a friend once tell me, he's like, I just don't get it. I mean, all these maps, all these charts, don't you think it's just too confusing? I go, well, you know, when you buy a bicycle and it comes in a box, you got to put it all together. It's like, don't you think those pictures that come in the instructions are helpful? That's the point, is you might get the bicycle together just by winging it. Most of us, it's a bicycle. We probably could figure it out. But it's like, but instructions, maps, these things. And I said, and think about it. The Bible doesn't have one book that's the eschatology book. Here's where all the answers about end times are. It's throughout the whole Bible, which means you need to read and understand much of the Bible to piece it all together. So here are some things about timelining the rapture. We're just going to walk through these, and then I'll be kind of putting them together again for you at the end. Statements just in the Bible. Jesus will snatch away the church. We just read about that in 1 Thessalonians 4, and I put 19 instead of 17. That's silly. I was typing fast. I literally made this entire list in Hawaii just off memory, and I tried to type it quick. When the church is snatched away, our bodies will be transformed into our resurrection bodies. That's found in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 50 to 58, Don't worry, I'll be putting like a whole big slide up there in the end, and I'll probably try and post the list later for you guys who don't want to have to write all the notes real fast. Jesus will return at the end of the tribulation period. Revelation 19, 11 to 21, he's coming on that white horse, right? And there's this beautiful description of him in Revelation 19. That's a fact we can put on the timeline. Jesus will return with the church. Jude makes reference to Jesus coming with the saints. Revelation 19, 7 and 8, when he returns, or 17, 8, yeah, he returns. So 7 and 8 describes to the church, the bride of Christ, are given these fine white robes, fine linen. And then in verse 14, here comes the holy ones with Jesus, wearing the white robes as fine linen, just as they were described just a few verses earlier. Colossians 3:4, 1 Thessalonians 2:19 and 3:13. These are all references to the church coming back with Jesus when he returns to the earth. Angels will also come. Matthew 25:31 explicitly states that he will return with the angels. So it's both. It's not either or. Both are explicitly mentioned. Now, after the second coming, all nations will be gathered before Jesus, and he will separate the sheep, believer, from the goats, unbelievers. Matthew 25:32 and to the end of the chapter describes this situation. I'm going to gather everyone on the earth before me and separate believers from unbelievers. That's important to keep in your back pocket for later. Jesus promised to receive us to be with him in the place he was leaving to go and prepare. John 14:3, we'll read those verses later and show a good connection on why that's so important. There is a future 7-year period of tribulation coming to the earth. End time stuff. Now, that's when people sometimes ask, how do you know? Okay, Daniel 7:25, Daniel 9:27, and if you read Revelation 11, both Daniel and Revelation make reference. Daniel mentions a 7-year period specifically. It's called a week. If you go back to my Daniel teachings, we talk all about it. It's in Hebrew, a week is literally a 7. At the end of our 7, we have Sabbath, and at the end of a 7, you work a 7, and that's the word they use. They didn't have a separate word for week. It was a 7-year period. It talks about the Antichrist setting up a covenant for 7 years, and then in the middle of it, breaking it. Revelation 11, it's good for slow people like us. 1,260 days, 42 months, a time, times, and half a time, a year, 2 years, and half a year, 3.5 years. 42 months is 3.5 years. 1,260 days is 3.5 years of 360 prophetic years, the 360-day year that the Bible uses. So people are like, I think it's symbolic. I don't think God's going to spell it out in every single way he can. I'm giving it to you months, I'm giving it to you in days, I'm giving it to you in years, to get the point across that the second half is 3.5 years. Much more is spoken about the Great Tribulation, which is technically the name for the second half, but sometimes we use it for the whole thing, but technically it's the second half. More is spoken about the latter 3.5 years directly, but the whole 7-year period is also spoken of. The tribulation period is God's wrath being poured out on the world. Revelation 6:16 is the people experiencing this on the earth, saying, save us from the wrath of the Lamb. It's God's wrath poured out on an unbelieving world, and that's one of those facts like I had in the top right. You don't timeline this, but you save this information because it's important for other things. Down here now. Okay, God has not appointed the church to wrath. Romans 5:9, Revelation 5:9, we'll look at that again later. God has promised to deliver us, completely remove us from, is what the Greek says, that time of wrath. Luke 21:36, 1 Thessalonians 1:10, Revelation 3:10. We'll pull some of those up in a little bit. The snatching away of the church will happen at a time of monotony of life. This is an important one that I think many people misunderstand, and I, for years, misunderstood. As the days of Noah, so too the times of the coming of the Son of Man. It's not talking about the morality of the days of Noah. Luke 17 is even more clear because he talks about Noah and of Lot. What does he describe for Lot? Buying, selling, planting. He's saying during this season, life's going on monotonously. Like every day, just next day. Nothing crazy's going on. Nothing is warning. And what he's saying is, just like in Noah's day, other than one crazy guy building a boat, life was just going on until one day the rain came. And then there was no stopping it. Sodom and Gomorrah. Every day was a normal day until one day it rained fire and brimstone. No one had any warning that the day was coming. He says, so too my coming will be. It's going to be a time of just monotony. In fact, later he even says it's a time of peace. People are going to say it's a time of peace. Life is just going normal when the church gets raptured. No one knows when the snatching away will take place. Matthew 24:36, Jesus says it explicitly. No one knows the day or the hour of the rapture. That's important. Got more. The second coming will take place after a series of identifiable events with exact times given. So if you read Revelation 11 and forward, even all the book of Revelation, the tribulation period has all these events that you should be able to identify if they were happening. So the idea there is simply like the halfway mark, when the Antichrist breaks the covenant, sets up the abominable, image inside the temple, wants to be worshipped, starts the mark of the beast. These are all things you'll know when they're happening. And they say 1,260 days. So literally, if you are in the tribulation and you start seeing a statue set up in a temple and told to worship it, start the little clock watch, 1,260-day countdown. Jesus is coming back. So we do know when that's going to happen. During the Great Tribulation, all unbelievers will take the mark of the beast, and all believers will need to go into hiding to escape being beheaded. So Revelation 13 talks about the mark of the beast, and it says, like, he's going to force all people to take it. Revelation 20, verse 4, makes reference to those who were beheaded for not taking the mark of the beast. There's only going to be two kind of people by the end of that tribulation. People with the mark and people trying not to get marked. Well, you have to receive the mark willingly. So it's like, people running away so they don't get beheaded for not taking the mark, I should say. Correction there. When the snatching away happens, believers and unbelievers will be in close fellowship. Luke 17:34-36 talks about it. One is taken, one is left. One is taken, and one is left. And they're all working together, living together, etc. We'll cover that more later. Last slide. Oh, yep, it's the review slide. Okay, that's everything we just covered. I will post that list. I'll make sure one way or the other I'll attach it to the sermon, or I'll share it on Facebook for you guys if you want to have it for future reference. But there's all the things we talked about. Now, I had a little multi-point thing real quick, but I want to hit this first. This is some of the stuff we just covered on that list. John 14, verses 2 and 3. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. The idea there is many rooms. Mansions are a mansion is a house with lots of rooms. So in my Father's house, there's tons of rooms. And I go to prepare a place for you. Hey guys, where did Jesus go? Thank you, Pam. I mean, that's it, right? I know it's simple, but like sometimes people make this like harder than it should be. He went to prepare a place. And he said, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you. Paralambano. Lambano means to pick up. Para is like parallel. It literally means to take to yourself. It's the literal Greek word for I'm going to take you and bring you alongside me. I will receive you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. Where is he? He's in heaven. What did he promise? I'm going to receive you and take you to myself. In Matthew 24, verse 40, when Jesus says 2 men will be in the field and one will be taken and the other left, it's that paralambano word. Taking to yourself. Some do teach, well, no, that's taking them off for judgment. That's a very different word. There is a different word that's used for that in the Greek. To carry off is literally what it is. You carry someone away for judgment. This is to take to yourself, to receive someone. Now, we got this. Key points to a pre-tribulational rapture. I mean, in short, if you guys want to hear, I could have made more. This was stuff like off my head, and it's not to boast. Let me say this too. I was an elder in my church long before I ever could have explained this stuff. I didn't take a huge interest in eschatology in my early years. I mean, I knew my Bible really well, but eschatology, I always just said, well, I don't plan on being here, so I don't need to study it too much. And that used to be my joke, but it's a big undertaking. It really is to understand all this stuff. And I've taught the Bible long enough now that I've got a good grip on it. But if you feel like it's overwhelming, yeah, it's a lot. But that's why we teach it and we reteach it as we keep hitting it through the scripture. So the first thing is this. We are promised that we can avoid the tribulation. That is my stance, period. Luke 21, verses 34 and 35. Take heed to yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, cares of this life, and that day come on you unexpectedly. For it will come on a snare on all those who dwell on the whole earth. I was trying to do 4 to 36, and I only went to 35. And then the next part, which I can just flip real quick over to and say to you, even though I almost have it memorized because I quote it a lot. Verse 36, watch therefore and pray always, that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass and to stand, or literally be found standing before the Son of Man. So he's saying, watch out that day doesn't come upon you, and watch and pray that you can escape all of this. Everything in the whole chapter, all the craziness of the tribulation, you get to escape that and be standing before the Son of Man. 1 Thessalonians 1:10 simply says, hey, we're waiting for the Son from heaven, whom he has raised from the dead, even Jesus, who delivers us from the wrath to come. And again, there's an article before wrath. It's not just saying Jesus delivers us from some wrath, and it's future wrath. It's not the wrath of sin that he's delivered us from. He's talking about the wrath that's coming that he was teaching them. Jesus delivers us from that wrath. In Revelation 3:10, he tells the church of Philadelphia, because you've kept my command to persevere, I also will keep you from the Greek word ek, literally out of the hour of trial, which shall come upon the whole world to test those who dwell on the earth. He says, hey, and it's not just because they kept the command to persevere. They kept the command to persevere because they're Christians. But because you're believers, you've hung in, guys, I want to let you know, I'm going to keep you from the hour of trial, which shall come upon the whole world. I'll talk more about the tribulation next week, because 2 Thessalonians goes much more in depth on the great tribulation. So I'm going to kind of skim chapter 5 here. But in short, I can keep you out of this. Ek means out of. The church is the ecclesia. It means called out ones. We are called out to go out and gather together, somewhere together. And so that's ek. Next, so some people think the rapture happens at the end of the tribulation. Some think it's the middle. I'm not going to cover all those positions tonight. I've done that before, again, that other series. But the idea, the second most popular, maybe they'd argue it's the most popular, I don't know, is if it's not the beginning of the tribulation, the next most popular view would be the end of the tribulation. Here's the deal, though. If it was the idea that at the end of the tribulation, God raptures everyone up and we come back with Jesus on the white horses, where is he going to find the sheep to separate from the goats? That's one of the things why these are important, trying to piece this puzzle together. He says he's going to return and gather everyone in the world, put believers here and unbelievers there. But if all the believers got raptured, he's going to return and only have goats, if it's a rapture that takes place at the end of the tribulation. So again, Matthew 25, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him, there's that reference, and he'll sit on the throne of his glory and all the nations will be gathered before him. He'll separate one from another as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. He'll set the sheep on his right hand and his goats on the left. So again, to have sheep, believers are still going to need to be here. And those will be people who got saved during the tribulation, because people are going to get saved during those 7 years. Now, point 3, only a pre-tribulation rapture can be imminent and during peacetime. So remember this. No one, of that day, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven but my Father. No one knows the hour, okay? Well, like I said, once the events of Revelation start taking place, you kind of know the hour's coming. And once you get to that halfway part, where the Antichrist breaks the treaty and all these other things, you could literally do a 3.5-year countdown. But right now, he could come today, he could come tomorrow. If the rapture is the next prophetic event to happen, it could be any time. 1 Thessalonians 5:3, for when they say peace and safety, that's going to be the attitude during the time of the rapture. Then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. And it's kind of that idea, again, like pregnancy. You know the season, right? I'm at the end of a pregnancy. Is it this week? Is it next week? Am I going to be 3 weeks early, 2 weeks late? But you don't know. But you know you're in the season, and then all of a sudden, water breaks, and then it happens. And once it's going, it's going. That's the idea, is that right now, we can identify a season. We can kind of identify that, okay, it seems like what Jesus is talking about, it seems like it could happen, but you don't know. If the rapture happens at a later date, people are not going to be saying peace and safety. Secondly, if we go back, I didn't put the verses up, but the monotony of life, buying, selling, this and that, that's not going to happen. Believers and unbelievers are cohabitating during the rapture, and it only makes sense if it's before or possibly early. I mean, I'm not going to, it's potential in the tribulation. So when you read in Luke, I tell you that in that night, two will be in one bed. The one will be taken, the other will be left. Two will be grinding together. One will be taken, the other left. Two will be at the field. One will be taken, the other be left. At the end of the tribulation, when there's people with the mark of the beast and people being beheaded for not taking the mark of the beast, can you imagine them sharing a bed, going out and working the field together, grinding at the mill? It doesn't make any sense. But right now it does. Sharing a house with an unbeliever, sharing a job with an unbeliever. It makes perfect sense in the season we're living in right now. Number 5, God has not appointed the church to wrath, but the tribulation is a time of God's wrath. These are simple ones I'm just flying through, right? Romans 5:9, much more having been justified by his blood, we have been saved from the wrath through him. There is, not in the New King James, but in the Greek, there is a the there. You're being saved from the wrath. It's more specific. 1 Thessalonians 5:9, for God did not appoint us to wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. This is a bonus one maybe you've never thought of. Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church. So if you're single and you're looking for someone to marry, ask him if he's a post-tribulationist, because that means he puts his wife through the tribulation. I don't know if I want to marry a guy like that. I want to marry a guy who loves me like a pre-tribulationist Jesus. So that's a joke, but it's just one of those things like, that's why God doesn't need to put his church through that. He can pull his church out, and he pours out his wrath on an unbelieving world. Last point, and we can move on for the night. This is my last, is to personally, I'm just saying, I think Revelation makes way more sense in light of a pre-tribulational rapture. You see, I'll go here real quick. Chapter 1 is introduction. Chapters 2 and 3 is the church age. 7 letters to 7 churches. And I'll tell you what, amillennialists, premillennialists, pre-trib, post-trib, I think every group who takes the Bible, at least somewhat literally, all typically agree that chapters 2 and 3 can talk about those specific churches, but also represents church ages. You can kind of get multiple cool gleanings from it. But chapter 4 now, if chapter 3 ends with the final church age, the lukewarm church, would you believe that the final church age before the rapture could be defined as lukewarm? Well, chapter 4, verse 1, after these things, the church age, I looked and behold a door standing open in heaven, and the voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me. The Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, with the trumpet of God. And the voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking, saying, come up here, and I will show you things which might take place after this. And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, the throne of heaven, and the Holy One sat on the throne. This would not by any means justify the belief in the rapture, the pre-tribulation rapture. But when all those other verses are already taken into account, and now I'm reading Revelation, this makes sense to me. Like, this sure sounds like the very beginning of the book. In chapter 4, starting there, we have letters to churches in chapters 2 and 3. The church is not mentioned again until chapter 19, and Jesus returns. There is no mention of the church, the ecclesia, in chapters 4 through 18. But in Revelation 5:9, we see people singing. They sang a new song. You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain and have redeemed us to God by your blood out of every tribe, tongue, and people and nation. It's believers singing. They're up in heaven at this point, and they're singing to the Lord. I made reference to this earlier in Revelation 19. Let us be glad and give him glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come. His wife has made herself ready, and to her was granted to be arrayed in fine linen, clean and bright, for the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. He said to me, right, blessed are those who are called to the marriage supper of the Lamb. It'd be a big blessing, because that means they're up there and not down on the earth. These are the true sayings of God. Then jumping a few verses ahead to verse 11, we're just going to take it all in because it's such a beautiful thing. Now I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes were like a flame of fire. On his head were many crowns. He had a name written on him which no one knew except himself. He was clothed with a robe dipped in blood. His name was called the Word of God. And the armies of heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. Some say, well, that's angels. Could be, because we already read, I think, angels and believers are going to return with him. But the fact that just a few verses earlier, it was talking about the church and the marriage supper of the Lamb, and they were given fine white linen to wear, it sure points to that for me. Now, verse 18. That was one verse. We got another verse to cover now, and another chapter. Verse 18 says, therefore comfort one another with these words. So guys, here's the thing. If Paul was trying to say, listen guys, there's going to be hell on earth, literally. I mean, there's no better way to describe it. There's going to be demonic things flying around stinging people. There's going to be fire and brimstone, hailstones and earthquakes, water turning to blood, the light refusing to shine, right? All of this is going to happen. But comfort one another that if you don't die, Jesus will come back to zip you to heaven so you can return with him. I don't find that comforting. But when he says, hey, pray, that you could escape all these things and be standing before the Son of Man, like that's comforting. Hey, because you've kept my command to persevere, I'm going to keep you from the hour of trial, which is going to become a snare on all those on the entire earth. That's comforting. And so for me, this idea, that's comforting. I don't find much comfort in any other interpretation of this.